Go ahead.
Well, I guess question is, number one is, was that a formal motion? Do you want to second that and then have discussion, or do we want to just?
Discuss it formally.
Okay, okay. I actually agree with Representative Summers on this because we can already see what happens when we get a whole bunch of data and a whole bunch of information in our last meeting, and trying to cram that into good policy decision-making, it's just not going to be the way to do it. So I do think moving it back, so we have it for that. I'd almost like to see it for the first interim meeting, but I think that's going to be really tough to get pushed in there. So I would say July would be the latest I'd like to see it. But that also puts a lot of work on the WDE in a very short amount of time from the end of school to our first or second meeting to get that information. But I do agree, putting it too far back is going to set this committee at a disadvantage.
Mr. Chairman.
What I'm going to suggest is that we go to the July 1st and be willing to listen to pleas from WDE that say we can't get it done that quickly.
So Mr. Chairman, I was just going to ask if maybe WD could comment if you'd give them. the
Okay,
opportunity.
I'll give them leeway at this point, but I won't put too much stock in their comment because they haven't had a chance to think about it. So WD, do you want to comment at this point, or do you want to think it out and bring your comment to the session?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Shelley Hamill, Wyoming Department of Education. We think we're already in the process of revamping the district literacy plan template to provide tighter data, tighter ranges of information, because we feel like what we've been collecting isn't providing what you've asked for. So we'd have that October 22nd district literacy plan. I don't think it would take us that long to pull together a committee of experts. I think we have probably a target list of individuals that we've used in the past, and we could pull that together so we believe we could make it by July.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that line though, and I realize we've got plenty of time to change that date. If we're assembling a group of experts, I don't want to just ask them honestly about which are the best screeners. I would also ask them, hey, give us some advice on what we should do to, once you've screened, respond. You know, what is the best approach for us to take? What are your thoughts on that? And would that take a later timeline than July, recognizing we can change it later if we need to?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, I think each time we add additional content to what we'd be asking of a group of experts, it will need additional time. Certainly this isn't their full-time job.
Change the September 1st date that's on lines 26 and 27 to July 1st.
So move.
I think there's a motion on the floor by Senator Ellis to remove some of B unless that was withdrawn and I somehow missed it.
Mr. Chairman, I think I modified my amendment.
Yeah.
If you're keeping track of what's going on, I'm getting a little lost.
Yeah, I think we did remove in the vote earlier that one sentence that starts, yeah. Okay, so the question then is, on adopting the whole of the Summers Amendment as amended. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carried. Okay. Representative Summers, amendment number 2.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would move Summers number 2. And Mr. Chairman, once again, I'll start where I started before. If you go to page 5, Mr. Chairman, you can see that we're still leaving in subsection E, which is shall require each teacher providing instruction in K-3 within district to receive professional development in evidence-based literacy instruction. So it leaves that section in, but then it really does, what it goes on in section 2, and I'll read it, it's in its entirety. But basically what it does is it gets rid of, starting on page 5, line 22, 23, deletes that, deletes what's on page 6, delete page 7, and deletes page 8. And then well, page 9, it goes on the same thing, which all's on 9 is staff comment. But basically it replaces that with section 2 that says no later than September 1st, and we can argue that date again. 2023, the state superintendent shall report to the Joint Education Interim Committee on the professional development requirements under WS 213401E. The report shall include the amount expended by each school district for school year 2023 on professional development associated with administering the K-3 reading assessment and intervention program. Under 213401, the report shall specify expenditures from the amounts provided by the Educational Resource Block Grant Model for professional development, federal funds, or any other funds expended by the district for the purpose of providing professional development for the K-3 reading assessment and intervention program. The report shall also include the recommended minimum annual professional development requirements for teachers grade kindergarten through 3. So basically right now we know the districts aren't using all the professional development dollars that they're being allocated. And yet what this bill would do would be, we're going to reimburse you for all of your professional development dollars associated with reading when we're not using the money we're using now. And so my question is, shouldn't we just take a little harder look at this? And I totally agree we should provide specific professional development to this. But my question is why aren't we using the money? What are we doing in this realm? Are we doing a lot in this realm and then just simply not using the money in other areas? I just think we need to know more before we spend the money.
Chairman?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the bringer of this amendment has a great point. I think my question though is what if a district just doesn't want to provide this information to the superintendent? There's no requirement in here that the district participate or provide that. I just was curious if you thought we could strengthen it or add to it to say that districts have to provide this.
Mr. Chairman, this is a question for LSO. Do we need that language in here or is it implied?
Mr. Chairman, if you could restate that.
Mr. Chairman, I guess the question is do we need to require that the districts provide this information if they're not currently? And, or is it implied in what we're asking for that they will provide that, the districts will provide it?
Mr. Chairman, I think to be safe, we'll specify a more detailed report is required for purposes of complying with this section.
Mr. Chairman, I might elaborate on that. The current expenditure detail that the departments have in their accounting manual don't get the level of the K-3 reading program, reading assessment intervention program. They have professional development, but it doesn't break out on exactly what programs they're specifying or spending those dollars on. And so if you want to know those dollars that they're expending on this specific program, you're gonna have to require that because the department's going to create a separate report to identify those expenditures. We don't collect that currently to that level of detail at the state level.
Mr. Chairman, along those lines, I mean, the reason I ask this is, we have the accreditation process. And that's really, my understanding, the only hook that the department has to keep track of what districts are doing. And if in theory, they don't provide certain information points or don't comply, they could lose accreditation, but I don't know that that happens ever. And so I'm just wondering, what if a district doesn't want to be forthcoming with this information? Is that in the bundle of things that the department can say, you need to do this, or you might face consequences? Or could a district just say, yeah, we're not going to provide this, we don't have to? I'm just curious. If we're going to do a report and have a study, I just want it to be thorough.
My suggestion on this is going to be that if we adopt Summers' amendment here, which I urge us to do, that we ask the LSO to draft one sentence that's a one-time report from the districts on this subject to get us a snapshot of what they're actually spending. Is that adequate?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and remember, we do have subsection E in here. So we are going to require professional development. Really what we need is the report that follows that up to go, okay, how much professional development did in fact did your teachers get, how much professional development did you put towards this? And what does that look like? And what was the cost? So we have some understanding of how it fits into the bigger picture. Yeah.
Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the bringer, I'd just like to be clear about the relationship of Summers 1 with Summers 2, because Summers 2 deletes page 8 entirely, where Summers 1 is on page 8.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I assume that the two amendments will become conformed because basically it's just that the two amendments don't conform on page numbers, but they will in the end because you'll make that happen.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, this will be a new section. Section 2 will be the amendment, the Summers 1 amendment. Section 2 in the second Summers amendment discusses the appropriation necessary for the professional development. And so I do think there are two separate and distinct amendments. Of course, we will change the section numbers accordingly based on what's adopted by the committee today.
And Mr. Chairman, I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to get out of funding professional development. And in the end, I will certainly be an advocate if we need to provide more than we are today. I think the tell will be right now, districts do not utilize all their professional development dollars. We put subsection E in which says you shall do it in this area. If there's an uptick in those and how much is used for professional development, then I think that's going to be a sign that maybe we need to add more. We'll know more.
We're just not in a position to go asking for more at this point, do we know? Everybody understand the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for a bringer of the amendment, just so the timing, just so I understand the timing of next school year. Really, you're just going to study next year. So we're not really putting anything into this. Originally, as the bill says, we're going to go gung ho next school year with professional development training. That's the way the bill's written now. And I see this amendment. This is how I understand it. And you correct me if I'm wrong. I see this amendment as saying, no, we're not going to go gung ho next year. We're going to actually study and see where this missing $3 million is out of a $1.5 billion appropriation and find out where that's at. And then the next year we'll see where we're at. Is that I just don't want to lose a year of this. I mean, we're here to try to amp up this K3 reading thing, and I don't want us to pause it.
Mr. Chairman, I think subsection E will go in effective with the effective date of the bill. So I think it'll happen, right? And so all this amendment's going to do is, I just wanted to understand what the dollars and cents was. Actually, what was the uptick? How much of it was done? And are we covering it?
So, Mr. Chairman, we can, so just then the question is, so I mean, what are we asking school districts to do then? I mean, do we want them to spend more than their, than the model provides? I mean, what do we really want them to do? Do we want them to really get after it and provide the best professional development we've ever done K through 3 and take people to the next level? That's what I thought we were trying to do. And I think, I don't know, less than 1% or some small amount of the deal. I just want to make sure we're sending the right signal with this bill, because I think we're about ready to take a major turn on this. Maybe I'm worried about something in real, but I guess that's my concern, that we just don't send the wrong message with this.
Your office. Or
Mr. Chairman, I think I can answer that. Is yes, this is a different direction. The direction before it in this bill was that we're going to pay 100% of the professional development for reading, even though they're not using the entire, even though districts are not using the entire allotment they have now. So what this would do is districts, you're gonna provide this professional development, and then we're gonna study how much money you spend on it to see if it fits within the constraints of the model. So it is definitely a different direction.
And let us remember that we've got right now a whole bunch of extra stimulus money going to districts. They have some flexibility because of that. And we're talking about a relatively small percentage of the model. So I think they still have the capabilities and will be motivated by the subsection E to in fact do it. So I don't read this as slowing us down, but keeping us out of trouble that we would get if you say we're going to fund something they're not fully spending right now. I think we will have trouble with the Appropriations Committee if nobody else.
Mr. Chairman, just so I think though the ARP funds, aren't those a reimbursement for expenses that occur? I mean, they have to do an expense, submit the ticket, get reimbursed. Not to get into the weeds on that, but and I understand what you're saying, but the nuance though of running the school business, I don't think it's different than maybe what we're thinking. And I just want us to be really careful because we're on the cusp, I think, of, we've done some really good work. I mean, you co-sponsored that bill a couple of years ago. We've done some really good work on K through 3 reading. I see us ready to take the next step. And I just don't want us to, for a few $100,000 to back away from that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Your office.
Thank you. I share Representative Harshman's concerns and when you look at E, really with or without this amendment, but I think the amendment further softens it, that there's no specificity in terms of the number of hours, the degree of understanding, how much instruction has to take place. If they're working within the current system and we basically say that all K3 have to receive some professional development, there's no financial incentive to doing that. They're just going to try and work within what they've got. They've got a limited amount of time. They're already honestly overtaxed. We heard that today. I think that's excellent testimony. We always hear that we've got too much on their plate, so they don't have time for this anyway. So we're not providing any extra financial resources. We're not providing any extra time, but we're giving them an E paragraph which says, hey, everybody needs to do some professional development. I don't think it's going to end up being as robust and in-depth as we want. So the cost data that we would get back from that report wouldn't tell me anything. It would just tell me, what's the minimum amount we can do to comply with paragraph E? Well, it turns out to be whatever they provide us with in the report. If we want to tackle this problem, we need to change something. Something has to come off the plate. There has to be more focus and more resources put towards it, and it has to be meaningful, which is basically what Representative Harshman's saying. We started down a path, and I think this is an important path. This paragraph, even as this bill is drafted right now, I don't think gets us a meaningful outcome. But with the amendment, I think it almost assures us an outcome that is just, all right, well, we had to check the box and we had to file the report. We did those things. It took us a lot of hours. So I have concerns with the amendment, but honestly, I'm not enthused about the bill to begin with because I don't think it does what we want it to. I agree with the intent. I mean, you all know I agree with the intent. It's just, are we getting there?
Further discussion on the amendment as proposed. Further discussion. Are you ready to vote? Okay, question being called. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
2 noes. Amendment carried. That takes care of your amendments, does it not? Let me come back to page 3. And just, this is a further item of transparency and trying to get the parents involved. On page 3, line 15, I would actually move that we insert after the plan period, middle of line 15, a sentence, a copy of the individualized reading plan shall be furnished to the child's parents or guardian. So that we're reinforcing that there has to be an individualized reading plan. That's already in the statute. And saying that you have to give a copy of that to the parent. It's consistent with the other things we've done here. It just reinforces that. So do I have a second for that? Okay, got a second. Do you need me to read it again? LSO, do you need me to read it again? Okay. Any further discussion? Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, my only question is an individualized reading plan. Would it not be given to a parent anyway?
You would think it would be, but we've had difficulties here with communication with the parents. We heard some of that testimony this morning. What this would do would be to simply reinforce that that's something you have to do as a matter of routine.
Thank you, Mr. I'm in favor of it. An IRP is not an IEP. And so to be specific about the expectation that parents get an IRP and not simply just the notification that we have further up in B makes sense to me.
Mr. Chairman, a friendly amendment to it is maybe say, instead of using the passive voice, say each school district shall provide a copy of the IRP to the child's parent, guardian, or other person, just to make it clear that that's their responsibility versus it shall be furnished. Who does that? That makes it really clear that the districts, that's their duty.
That's friendly. Also, did you catch that? Okay. Rewritten my language and improved it. Okay, with that change, everybody understand what we're doing? Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Anything else? Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, members.
Page which?
On page 2, Mr. Chairman, on line, it's going to be on line 9. And really and as I read through this statute, and basically some of the testimony we talked about 7 months before the screening and everybody was busy and all those kind of things. But I think generally these screeners are giving, fall, winter, and spring, usually, I think in most of our elementary schools. And I'd propose an amendment, Mr. Chairman, that on line 9, right after the word possible. So if you read through that, screens for signs, dyslexia, other reading difficulties as early as possible, then I would like to insert the language in each of the 4 quarters. Then the line continues in kindergarten through grade 3. So we're going to make sure that as soon as possible in each quarter of the year, we're going to give these 3-minute, 4-minute screeners to each child in your class. And the teachers do it generally 3 times a year and 2 times a year. And I'm proposing that we kind of standardize that every quarter. So that's my amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Question for the bringer, and it is, I'm taking a quick look at the summary sheet of what districts are using. You're making an assumption that each of these screeners is 3 minutes. I'm just curious if any of our districts right now are using ones that are an hour, for example, and then that would require doing it 4 times a year, an hour-long assessment. Any idea?
Mr. Chairman? I guess my understanding of the screener is that's more of a test. I mean, the screener is a quick instrument, kind of a check-in. And that doesn't take very long and to make sure kids are on progress. So that's my intent.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for the bringer. If all schools work on a quarter system, I know that our high school anyway is on a trimester system. And I'm wondering if we need to be a little more flexible in that time, like refer to academic terms or semesters or something that maybe doesn't reference quarters. I'm not opposed to the amendment at all, just wanting to make sure that those schools that have a different timing system than quarters would be addressed.
Representative Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative, I thought of that too. And I think, but the intent really is to not be told and wait 7 months and to really, get to this. And most aren't, I don't think, I think most are, but I think then also to make sure that because kids change a lot in a few weeks. I think we can adapt that to whether it's a trimester or whatever those schedules, but the idea is let's take a quick pulse check on this at least 4 times a year. Doesn't take long. And most teachers, I think, are probably doing this, but I think it's just puts that standard out there. So I don't think it's adding a burden to anybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. In your office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And again, I support the concept. I don't know enough to know whether there are unintended consequences of the motion. I do share that maybe the language could be switched to something like at least 4 times per year as opposed to each quarter. It accomplishes the same thing. And I think that language would be preferable. But I guess my concern is jumping in. This is precisely the type of thing I'd want to hear from the expert stakeholder committee instead of from members of our esteemed interim committee, honestly, is how often should we do it? When, why, how, all of those kinds of things. I would want experts telling us, even if it seems like a good idea, I don't know enough to know whether I should be voting aye.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, on in support. I do think this is good. And if we learn more from that study, then we can put that in statute. But the one other thing I think we're going to have to do, I think that idea, Senator Rothfuss, is how often should we do it? We need to remember that if we're not going to fix it now, we need to remember that when we go to session to make sure we put that in the body of the text. That's part of the study. So we have that clearly in the study.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote for it because I like the idea of it, in all honesty, but I hope that we get some feedback by the time we get into session. The one school district that had put down how long it takes, Fast Bridge early reading, which is K through 1, is 5 to 7 minutes. So it's not 3, it's double that. So I just would like to hear and make sure that this is something that can be implemented. I don't want to put something in that can't be really implemented in a meaningful way, but I like the idea behind it.
And I think then the advice you're giving is put it in and then we'll hear if there's a problem about it. Okay, that makes sense. Question being called. Everybody understand? All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carried. Committee, got one further question for you. We heard specific objection, particularly from the administrator from Sheridan. He's not the administrator, but one of them in Sheridan. To the provision on page 4, line 6 and 7, the rule shall identify not more than 3 instruments approved for use by school districts, et cetera. They were objecting to the not more than 3. The philosophy of the first summer's amendment was more in line with what Sheridan was telling us, but we still have this specific requirement. Should we remove this requirement? In your office.
And I think we should. I've honestly never thought this was a good choice for us to go down the road of having a not more than 3 instruments. I think I'm probably convinced at this point that having approved instruments by the department is a potentially good thing, maybe. But limiting the number is not going to be a good choice. So I would move on page 4 to strike line 7, not more than 3 and the number, and then on page 10 onto page 11, not more than 3, which just then leaves the sentence constructs as the rule shall identify instruments approved for use, et cetera. And the syntax is still correct. So I would make that motion to remove the caps on it and just go with the approval of instruments.
Hey, do I hear a second? I heard a second. Okay. Representative Knapp. Everybody, any further discussion? Senator Ellis.
I think I know where this is going to go, but I just in defense of it, I mean, the whole point of this was we heard, and this was a conversation we had 3-4 years ago, was some districts use screeners that are inadequate at flagging dyslexia and other reading difficulties. That was what all of a sudden, something woke in my brain. And so the notion that, we leave this up to the department, we haven't heard some strong feelings one way or another. My concern is that we'll approve all 38 without any look of whether or not all of those screeners are appropriate and effective at flagging reading difficulties. And so that is my concern by not having at least some kind of cap on it. But like I said, I don't read tea leaves, but I think I know where this is going. I just wanted to voice that concern. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Chairman, I amended this 2 ways when I looked at it. One was the way he just amended it. The other way is you leave the number in and you push out the implementation of that 3 until 2023 after you've had your study, and then you have it in there as 3. And then somebody's got to give you a good reason why it should be something different than that. So there's 2 ways to do it. I'm comfortable either way, but yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't heard a single special educator or anybody in this community as a stakeholder come up and say, hey, we just need 3 instruments. Stop. Just do it at 3. This is just us. We created this idea of 3. It was a motion. I didn't like the motion. I think I voted against the motion that created this, and that was the impetus for this bill. It isn't based in science. It isn't based in analysis that we've heard from stakeholders. It's based in us wanting things to be easy when we take our reports so that we can compare, because we like to see things as apples to apples. But at the end of the day, these students aren't apples. They're individual students, and they probably need different screeners and different diagnoses at different times. And something good might come along, and the speed of government is not necessarily good enough to make sure that we have the best tools used at all times. Now, that said, I think what Senator Ellis is saying about the fact that just approving all of them as equal, that might not be good either. It probably would be handy if we had some sort of a grading system or evaluation system where we knew and we could say to the school districts, these are really good screeners. These screeners are not particularly good, and we put some work into it. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but having a hard cap on it, I think, is bad policy. Having expert analysis that provides feedback and recommendations to school districts that they can rely on because stakeholders and experts like the folks we have here today sat down and did the work, I'm game. That's great. But a hard cap, that's just us making policy without necessarily having a motivation or support, I should say, for it. We have motivation, but not support. So maybe we can add that language to try and get some sort of an evaluation process done instead of, but the hard limit is this motion.
The hard limit is this motion. I'm going to support the motion for a very practical reason that I think having a hard limit will rouse too many school districts against the bill and we won't get it introduced, let alone passed, with that hard cap in it. Because I think they'll be afraid we're going to knock out too much of their existing practice. They have confidence in it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with that. I think the unfortunate thing was we have, and we continue to hear parents that say the screening tool used in my school district did not capture reading difficulties my child had. So my hope would be that when the department's doing its review of what instruments are out there, that it is a little more exacting and not just, oh, all three, because they're used, they all must be okay. We're not responding to that concern. I agree that 3 maybe is not the right number. We haven't quite cracked this nut though.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I'm going to support the amendment, but in particular with Summers One. Summers One has the department getting together, that group of stakeholders to look at these tools. Then they're going to come back to us and tell us, and you've been here all day, whether it's 3, 5, or infinite is the number, if there should be a number. So that's honestly what we expect in part out of the Summers One amendment. So I'm totally fine with this.
Mr. Chairman, I have one more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's on page 8, which has been deleted by one of the Summers amendments. It's on page 8 of the bill. It's the old section 2. And Mr. Chairman, on page 18, or excuse me, line 18 of page 8. And here's really my issue with this. We don't know what the 48 school districts crew reports look like. Maybe some are spending more on professional development. Some are spending less. We have no idea. We see this aggregate number. And so I propose to bring back this section 2 in an amended form. It'd be like a new section 3, I guess. And but start on line 18 and just insert that this appropriation, you can read lines 13 through 18, and that is in excess of the amount appropriated in the block grant. And then it talks about for reading assessment and everything. So if a district actually spent more, they could go to the department for a little reimbursement. So if the district spent more than what they've been appropriated in the block grant model on professional development, because we want to encourage them to do more. And right now, this doesn't really do that. And I'm just trying to, what if you're that district that spent all your professional development money? And so really just putting those words in that this is that this appropriation would be for reimbursement for expenses for reading assessment, intervention, professional development for next school year that are in excess of the amount appropriated in the block grant. And then, Mr. Chairman, I would propose on line 21 to take out the intent of the legislature that this be an ongoing appropriation. This would give us 1 year to look at it. And then, Mr. Chairman, my appropriation amount, I don't know, the body could probably, I'm thinking like 500,000 would probably be plenty, I would think, as a reimbursement tool. So that's my amendment.
And it's just putting in 2 cents.
Mr. Chairman, really just putting in one sentence and removing the other sentence about the intent is that this be a standard budget item.
So,
I don't think that's our intent.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to amend the, then, I'd like to move that down to 200,000. But I haven't got a second. So.
Mr. Chairman, I honestly don't know how it would then work. Honestly, having it capped in any number presents a little bit of a problem because you're assuming that the total value of reimbursement that's asked for will somehow come in under your arbitrary cap. If $500,000 worth of requests come in and we lower it to 200,000, what happens? Is it prorated? I mean, what's the answer there? So it breaks it to have a cap. I thought a 500,000 was probably going to be high enough, but as we winnow it down, once it gets to appropriations, it'll be $22,000 or something like that. And we just won't have a program. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but it causes a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, because I didn't get to talk on it before the question was called. From our last two recalibrations, it was clear that we are not spending what we should be in terms of professional development for the best possible outcomes. And we actually see it in the staff comment, where the staff comment says that we are allocating 12.3 million. In general, we're only spending 8.3, so that leaves 3.7 left. So it looks like we have money left. I think Representative Harshman made a really good catch here. What about those districts that are in fact using all of their professional development money? If we don't have something like this section 2 in there, it would mean for those that are really being fastidious to the model that they're not going to have the same professional development for other areas that they are already. We don't want that. We don't want that. And so it absolutely makes sense that we actually add on to those that are using their full amount. So with that, compromise between the 2 and the 5, but so that we could have a bigger conversation about the importance of professional development in general.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on how the professional development money works within the block grant. Is it like other areas of the block grant where some of that money can be spent for, say, higher salaries and be used, quote, used up? Or is it specifically you have to show that you actually spent the money on professional development and provide receipts?
It is your first, So it really comes down, the argument you'll hear is the block grant big enough or not? And this would get that bill into that argument where I get nervous about it.
So following up, then, if we were to pass this, then every district would probably say they used up their block grant and we'd reimburse everybody, correct? I mean, what's the incentive to not use that money?
Representative Harson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if we adopt this amendment to access this little pool of money, you in fact make professional development categorical. You have to show that you've spent it all on professional development. And so, yeah, that's the intent. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, so just to be clear, so I want to make sure that's the right verbiage, because that's the alternative, is we just do make it all categorical, not just in this motion, the 300,000, but then all of it becomes categorical. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is not in this motion, as I understand it, but to access this 300,000 that is proposed, you would have to then show the categorical expenses. I spent my small district gets 400,000 in the block grant for professional development. Yes, we spent 430, and this amount extra was spent on K through 3 reading. Please reimburse us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm warming to this, but I'm not ready to get there today. I think if we, I know for some of you have sat on recalibration, probably have a better handle on those districts that actually spend all of their PD money. If we bring this back in an amendment, I could warm to it a little bit, but as of today, I'm not quite there.
So, Mr. Chairman, I probably won't vote for this, even though I voted for the last one, because I think we do need to examine, we could for 1 year, make the whole thing categorical and add in, right now it's $133.91 per ADM. We could tweak that to where that would be another 300,000, make the whole thing categorical. And then frankly, see how we spend our professional development money. And it would force districts to expend it on professional development or turn it back. I'm not so sure that professional development shouldn't be a categorical exclusion, period. But that's another story.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if I could go before the sponsor and then she can have the last word, but I just think, for me, I think this bill, what are we really trying to do? And we're trying to get moving. And we've already lost like a third of a year to COVID for those kids. They're never going to get that back. I don't care what you say. It's changed the school world and it's going to take a while and then now we're going to study it for a year. I'd try to incentivize our districts because what we say really is we get what we focus on and say, well, we're just going to study it and we'll focus on it next year. I just think we could get going a little bit and 300,000 is a pretty small sum to send an important message.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and just to follow up, that it's a last comment. That really is the purpose of it. We want districts to be recognizing this as an issue and that we support them in getting the professional development of their teachers in order to implement this well. We don't want a 3 to 6 minute screening tool that then becomes useless. We want them to be able to use it and to use it well, and we're going to support them doing it. This is a necessary element for districts that are already doing professional development.
Okay.
So I call the question.
Questions being called? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Chairs in doubt. Show of hands. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Amendment carried.
Not like we want to end up in Representative Nyman's lap. It is, the sun is going like this and we're just, we're
Yeah.
just curious. And everyone. I'm not sure
Okay,
if we need.
that's neither here nor there on the bill. The question is, shall we sponsor the bill? Is there further discussion? You ready for the question? Under
I'm going to support the bill. Honestly, I still don't think the bill does enough to go down the road that we want to go down. There's a lot more we could do. So what I would maybe ask the community of stakeholders is to come back to us with some feedback on what would meaningfully change the game in a relatively short period of time, recognizing that we want to be doing something soon, as well as hearing later feedback. I think this is probably a positive step. But at the end of the day, I don't know that it's going to be a meaningfully positive step. I think it's just a bill.
I will say, I think the bill will do more than you think, but it is clearly just a start. And we need to start.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. I'm not saying I don't agree with both of you. I think in the end, if we're not willing at the state level to put some more resources or redirect resources towards this issue, then it is just simply paper. And so I hope from the study, we get information that we will act on and actually try to put more resources towards reading. And I mean, there's a myriad of ways we can do that. But in the end, we have to, we can't just ask for another report. We need to act on it if we get it.
With that, ready? LSO, call the roll, please. And this is on sponsorship of the bill for introduction. Budget session.
Yes, sir. On 22 LSO 0106 as amended, Senator Brightman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown left a proxy of aye.
Okay,
Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermuller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Paxton. Chairman Scott.
aye.
14 aye.
Okay, thank you, committee. Committee, the next.
It's about 11:30.
Yeah, the next item is the truancy bill. Are you prepared to go right into that, or do we need to take a break first?
Break wouldn't hurt.
Oh, okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So back at 4. Ugh. we do have a quorum. Committee, that first bill took longer than we predicted. So the consideration of the Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship Program is going to be put off till first thing tomorrow morning. So anybody that is interested in that, take notice. The next item then for our discussion is 22 LSO 0103, Absenteeism and Currency. We discussed that bill extensively at previous meetings, but it got carried over to this last meeting. Senator Ellis, you're on to bring us up to date on that bill and tell us why we should vote for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to refresh the committee's memory, and I'll be brief. You'll recall that a big part of this bill begins on page 5, and that's defining what an excused absence is, but then further refining whether or not the absence is due to the fault of the child or the parent. So you'll see the definition of habitual truant means any child who's disobeying the demands of the kid to be at school, compared to willful absenteeism, where this is actually the parents failing to get their kids, parent or guardian failing to get their kids to school. So page 5 creates those definitions, but to walk backward then, you'll see on page 2, based on those definitions, we would amend the Child Protective Act to amend the definition of neglect to include that instance where you have willful absenteeism who is, the fault is on the parent. So that's a cross-reference there. On the bottom of page 2, moving on to page 3, you'll see this also a conforming amendment and the child in need of supervision. This would cross-reference that definition that we just created of what a habitually truant child is. And then another conforming amendment in the Child in Need of Supervision Act on the bottom of page 3, the Compulsory Attendance Act. So those are all meant to be conforming amendments. Going on to page 4, this is one small change that you'll see from the last version that we worked on. This is also a conforming amendment. Instead of allowing the districts to define what a habitual truant is and an unexcused absence, because we defined habitual truant on page 5, we would strike that requirement on page 4, line 6. Moving on to page 6 of the bill, this is all similar to what you've seen before.
Sure.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I struggled with this as I've read it. I go to Romanet 2, habitual truant. And I don't understand what this means. Okay, I don't understand when it's triggered. Who disobeys reasonable and lawful demands of the child's. That means any child who disobeys reasonable and lawful demands of the child's parent, guardian, custodian, or other proper authority. And I assume that would include a district. But I'm really struggling. I always want to know when things are triggered. So if you can tell me what triggers this, give me some examples, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The representative's concerns haven't come up until just now that I'm aware of. So what the trigger is, skipping school. If you want to come up with a more artful way of saying that, but the parent says you need to be at school and the kid doesn't show up, or the child leaves the school premises, but it is the child who is not getting themselves to school. And I think that language is, this is my, I think, 3rd or 4th year working on this. That's the intent. I don't know that piece of that I think the triggers there among the districts. I don't want to speak for them, but that hasn't been raised as an unclear part of this, but happy to keep working on the language if you want. Mr. Chairman, I'll continue then. Going on to page 6, then now you're seeing we're out of Title 14. These are Title 21 Compulsory Attendance Acts. So talking about the rules and policies for the school districts, just making it conform to say that any attendance officer shall investigate causes of unexcused absences, which do include habitual truancy and willful absenteeism. And then here you'll see a little more substantive change. The attendance officer has to give written notice to the parent or guardian. Again, just bringing in some of those conforming definitions, 21.4.102 and 23.3.110A, Romanet 39. And then after such notice has been given, the child has continued excused absences. the local board, under the local board rules, and the attendance officer reasonably believes that the excused absences were due to neglect. And then that's cross-referenced to find the willful absenteeism. The attendance officer shall proceed in accordance with 21-4-107, which we'll get to on the next page. So again, those are meant to be largely conforming amendments because we did away with this notion that through statute will prescribe the certain number of days that a student has to be absent. And we did that because some schools have moved to a 4-day school week. So a day missed from that school might be different than a school day missed from a different district. So that's where we gave the districts more flexibility to define that. Moving on page 7, 21-4-105. This is another important part of the bill. This deals with the penalty and the fines. Currently, a parent could be cited with a misdemeanor and face a $5 to $25 fee, which seemed too low to some, or imprisonment in a county jail not to exceed 10 days, which seemed too harsh. I think we've received a lot of testimony that school districts aren't really looking to punish parents and students who are failing to get their kids to school. And so here we cite the fact that they might be subjected to proceedings under the Child Protection Act and the Children in Need of Supervision Act, which are less, court-based and more, what kind of parental support and child support can we provide to make sure that those kids are getting and those families getting resource that they need to get their kids to school. So that was an area of contention last time we met, was making that clear. And then finally on page 8, this deals with the notice that needs to be given to the district attorney. So when the attendance officer of any school district determines that a child is habitually truant or has been absent due to willful absenteeism, then the attendance officer shall notify the Board of Trustees and the district attorney, and the district attorney may initiate proceedings. Right now we have the word shall, but we often hear that some district attorneys don't take up these cases. So may is more of a reflection of their ability to have some prosecutorial discretion. And then we also have heard testimony that more often than not, when they do bring these proceedings, it's not under the Juvenile Justice Act, but the Child Protection Act or the Children in Need of Supervision Act, or both as appropriate. Beginning on line 14 on page 8, you'll also see some language to make it clear that if the child is an Indian child as defined by the Indian Child Welfare Act, then the district attorney shall notify the child's tribe and may initiate proceedings in the interest of the child. This notice to the tribe allows them the opportunity to intervene if they're interested in that case. You'll also see language beginning on line 19. If the Indian child, however, resides on the Wind River Indian Reservation, the attendance officer shall notify the tribal court prosecutor, and the tribal prosecutor may initiate proceedings pursuant to applicable tribal law and order code. That is, we added that language out of respect to our tribal law counterparts. They have jurisdiction under the Indian Child Welfare Act to initiate those proceedings. But the problem right now is a lot of school districts are unclear of who they need to notify. Do they need to notify the tribal court or the district court? And so this is an attempt to make sure they have clear guidance about who they need to notify so that we're satisfying federal law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ellis, I have a question regarding possible overlap and just wanted to hear a talk through of it on, this is page 8. Beginning on line 14, if the child is an Indian child as defined, the district attorney shall notify the child's tribe and may initiate proceedings in the interest of the child if authorized to do so under state and federal law. And then the next provision is the tribal prosecutor. Are there going to be circumstances where there would be effectively dual jurisdiction and dual authority, and there might effectively be proceedings in both a state jurisdiction and a tribal jurisdiction? And I'll stop there. Is that a possible thing?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe so. The intent of this is if you have a child who's living off reservation, but is an Indian child, anytime you might have a proceeding that might result in them being placed in foster care or termination of parental rights, anything of that sort, then the tribe just has to be notified. They don't assume jurisdiction of that case, but they can intervene as an interested party. So how it would work would be the state more or less would make the case that the guardians are unfit, maybe the child needs to be placed in foster care under, CHINS or one of those other acts. The tribe's interest would be to say, in that placement, then we have options as a tribe for tribal foster placement. And so it's really under the umbrella of the state's jurisdiction. Compare that to if the child, however, lives on reservation, then there are proceedings that happen wholly within the tribal court. And so it's not desired to have two proceedings and double two different cases. It's one or the other, but the first clarifies the tribe's role that they can intervene and be part of that. And, certainly there are more nuances in this area of the law, but what we're trying to do is just provide the bare minimum guidance of what the attendance officer is supposed to do. Any of those fights of, should this be transferred to tribal court, what have you, I think will be decided as long as there's open lines of communication and decided by those courts. Again, the whole purpose of this section is what's the duty of the attendance officer? Who do they need to notify?
Thank you.
Senator Summers.
Mr. Chairman, so I want to go back to my habitual truant problem. And so, you go to page 8 and then that triggers the Child Protection Act, Children in Need of Supervision Act. And I know it's just my memory. I can't remember. I honestly can't the reason. So we go from something that's very clear, which is 5 unexcused absences, to something now that's very nebulous that could be 1. I admit we have a may, right? We have a may on page 8, initiate proceedings, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of guidance in this. And I'm just trying to figure that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is the result of countless hours at this point of my life. This was a compromise we reached in working with the School Boards Association on this language. They didn't like the apples to apples days and prescription by the state of Wyoming to decide what that threshold level should be. The compromise was that we would allow them to do it, but that they do it through their rulemaking so that we could look at each district individually and they decide that and decide what's right for their districts.
Representative Overmiller.
Just to follow up on that idea, I'm wondering if it can't be tied somehow to those rules in Romanet I and just somehow word it to be once the rules of I have been exhausted, then it's habitual truancy or something along those lines. That would just leave it kind of open-ended that way. Is that a possibility?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not following along. I'm sorry.
Well, under Romanet I, it says that unexcused absences as defined by the rules. And so habitual truancy would be once a person has basically exceeded the parameters of those rules that they get into this next level somehow, just tying it to, to avoid setting those what the rules should be. It's, that's kind of that next step once they've exhausted the unexcused absence rules. I'm just thinking out loud on this. I don't know that I know the answer. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what we're trying to get after is the fact that unexcused absence would be an umbrella statement of why a kid's not getting to school. Habitual truant would narrow that to say it's the fault of the student, and willful absenteeism would say that's the fault of the parent. But overall, it's bad if you have both, right? Like if you have a kid that isn't going to school and cuts school and their parents also not getting them there. So that's why those two definitions kind of exist. And unexcused absence, I think, can cover both instances or, one or the other. So again, I don't know that I'm totally following, but again, colleagues, if you want to bring amendments, make this work, that's great. I'm just telling you, this is lots of conference calls and trying to hash it through. So I'm trying to be faithful to some of those negotiated pieces of this bill.
Representative Overmiller.
Yeah, just a little follow-up. So if these are, if they're working under this bill and they look at unexcused absences and habitual truancy is subject to the rules of I, then that gives them the flexibility to develop the rules that say, here's basically what happens. And then they are, have the flexibility to say there's 5 of these under the habitual truancy. They're free to make that kind of rule to then say that beyond that, then they drop into habitual truancy realm. It just seems like it's a next step above unexcused absences to me, but maybe that's not the intent here.
Mr. Chairman, all I can say is these definitions were developed, have been years in the making and reflect lots of negotiated concepts that tried to afford districts the flexibility, local control that they so desire. If you want to make them more prescriptive, certainly that's your prerogative, but that's how these were developed.
Further, there's a question. Do I hear a motion? Let's first ask, is there any public testimony? Mr. Farmer, do you care to say anything? Somebody stood up there. I couldn't see who it was. The light's dead in my face. The sun is.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kevin Mitchell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. I'll be brief. I think Mr. Obermuller's thinking of the next step that a school district would do would probably put a number to those unexcused absences that would then trigger what a habitual truant would be. Now it's 5 by state law. They might say 5 or 10 or whatever. That would be that local decision, but I think that they would have to create their own automatic trigger. So I think the language is okay. And we did have a group of superintendents work with Senator Ellis and Representative Larson on this bill, and we're okay with it as written. But that would be a natural trigger point.
Okay. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is the disconnect that I see, and it's the same, I think, as Representative Obermuller, is that Romanet 2 does not refer back to the district's rules making process, that it would say that habitual truant will be defined in rulemaking under blah, 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 blah. And so that's my problem is I can't connect the two.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, just working in this realm for many years. When a school district develops their rules, they will include that trigger in their rule. So they will, under number 1, they'll look at number 2, double I, and they'll create their own trigger point.
Mr. Chairman.
It doesn't say that, but that's what will happen.
So, Mr. Chairman, in willful absenteeism, we go back to rulemaking in 110A, whatever that is, 39. We have it in Romanet I, but I don't see where we give you, because we've given explicit authority in 2 Romanets. We do not give you authority in Romanet 2. Maybe I'm totally wrong, so I'll ask LSO. If we want to do, are we good here? Can they go ahead and in rulemaking define habitual truant as so many unexcused absences? So I'm asking LSO that question.
Mr. Chairman, as you referenced, Romanet 39 provides school districts with authority to define unexcused absence. And as you know, habitual truant does not refer to that rulemaking authority. Perhaps it's inherent in defining unexcused absence, but you could certainly utilize the language that you have on page 5, lines 17 and 18 to kind of craft something similar in habitual truant. One thing it would offer is, and I don't want to further complicate this, but habitual truant and willful absenteeism are not mentioned. Neither one of those is mentioned in the school district's authority and rulemaking. Only unexcused absence is mentioned.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think I'm following up. The hard part of this is we tried to tackle this all once in one bill, and now it's coming back to me. The whole point of page 4, paragraph A, Romanet 39 is define unexcused absences for all students who are attending public schools and establish rules regarding student attendance. So that would be giving it to the district saying you have to pick a day, pick a trigger. So that's there. But what we don't want them doing is defining what a habitual truant is separately. That's why we took it out of there. So part of this is we're trying to catch up. Am I correct? And that's how we thought we were tackling that before.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, that's correct.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, if Representative Summers still has an excuse, not excuse, excused absence. He still has an excused absence. I promise I was just reading off the page. If Representative Summers still has concern with it, I think a solution would be define unexcused absences for all students who are attending public schools, including the number of days. I mean, something along those lines to make it clear that they've got to have a trigger. Then that's a suggestion. I think it's there already, but that's my thought.
Representative Conley.
Mr. Mitchell, have you been in contact with the districts that are on the reservation with this latest version of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, yes. We had 2 out of the 3 superintendents from reservation school districts on our committee with Senator Ellis. They helped us with all of it, plus the piece on the last page. This last page has actually been taken to both tribal courts and approved by the tribal courts on the reservation.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wants to testify on this bill? Mr. Farmer.
Mr. Chairman, we also have Lindsay Sherling from DFS online as well.
Okay, we'll hear from Mr. Farmer first, then we'll go there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Well, we weren't part of the discussions that Senator Ellis had with superintendents. I think the bill by and large is a good bill. Certainly can see and appreciate. The problem with habitual truant is that it doesn't define habitual, it defines truant. And so that becomes kind of the question, the threshold question of what is, how many truancies is enough for the truancy to be habitual, because that then does trigger some of those pieces of references to the child in need of supervision or other things. And I think a simple way to do that, and I do appreciate, we did object to a statutory defined number. Our membership has suggested that it is when it is at the point that it impedes the child's education. So I think you could just then in that Romanet 2 on page number 5 to the end of the sentence, just say, and as further defined in the rules of the local board of trustees. And you can add the statutory side as well. But that would be our intent under the current language, which again, we're good with the bill, would be that we would have policy, the draft or model policy that our attorneys would put out for districts to take as their starting place. And we would likely then in that model policy, which they would have to adopt using the Administrative Procedures Act, we would have kind of a definition of truancy that either has a threshold number or a description of how habitual the truancy must be in order for it to be habitual truancy.
Thank you. And just to refresh everyone's memory, we've pushed against having whether or not it impedes on the student's learning, just because then I think you're starting to get in a situation where if you're a good student, it's okay for you to cut class, but if you're a bad student, we're really going to get after you. And so that's where we, left that concept out of this bill on purpose. And so we can get in the weeds of habitual truant if you want, but that's the whole point of page 4 in allowing districts to define what's unexcused. That's broad rulemaking authority. So I think all the pieces are there for them to do their job. I think if we're going to add any language, it should say, if we want the districts to include a number of days, adding that requirement in page 4, but I don't think you need to add it for habitual truant or willful absenteeism. I think you add it for anything that's unexcused. And those are both, unexcused is the catch-all for both, if it's the fault of the parent or the fault of the kid.
And Mr. Chairman, I would concur that the absenteeism is just the description of not being at school. Truancy in its classic sense is a child who is disobeying parental direction, parental order. I went to school, my mom and dad dropped me off, but then I left. That's the classic definition of truancy.
Ms. Schilling, if you want to go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Schilling. I'm currently the Senior Administrator for the Social Services Division at DFS. Just to provide a couple of brief comments, we have no concerns over the language in the bill and do agree it goes a long way to creating a distinction in responsibility and faults for local jurisdictions to be making decisions accordingly. Ultimately, DFS defers to that local decision-making process and the determination to file a petition. And we would stand ready to support kids and families depending on the decision of the local district attorney and that decision-making team at a local level. But we have no concerns over the draft as written. Thank you.
On the bill. Anybody else? Okay, public testimony is closed. Do I hear a motion on the bill? Second. Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, maybe it's just me, and I guess I'll find out if I make an amendment, but I do on page 5, Mr. Chairman, I'll just go with the language that Mr. Farmer used, and that is under habitual truant at the end of the sentence, and as further defined in the Board of Trustees, by the Board of Trustees pursuant to 21.3, whatever the number is, that whatever their rulemaking authority is. I assume it would be the same rulemaking authority as unexcused absence, but that'd be I just think I really couldn't understand how you were going to make the determination of what a habitual truant is. And until the board makes that definition, I think it's just a whole.
Okay. Second the amendment. It's moved and seconded. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at Representative Connolly, because this was a point you raised, that if we're going to define it here, then why would we let the districts define it? The whole point of letting the districts define unexcused absence was so they could pick the number of days and add some further refinement. But the habitual truant, we've already thought we covered. So this was a point you brought up, which is contrary to where Representative Summers is going. So if you want to, I'm trying to jog your memory, because that was something we did in response to a comment you made. I've been dancing way too much on this, and I'm just going to push it back on everybody who's weighed in. So do you remember this? This was a you issue.
Fine, thank you, Senator Ellis. Mr. Chairman. I vaguely remember, what we wanted to do is make sure that there was consistency between and among each of the sections and the responsibilities of each of the entities. I think it works the way it is right now. I understand that but I'd have to go back, to tell you the truth, and really see if there is the issue that Representative Summers is talking about. Because honestly, I thought I did catch them all at the time.
Mr. Chairman, maybe it'll be implied, but I do not see where school districts have the authority to define habitual truant, which is what we want to do. So I think we have to give them that authority. I don't think it can hurt. to give him that authority.
Mr. Chairman, so look at page 5, we introduced a definition of what a habitual truant is. When we said that, if you go back to page 4, line 6, presently they have the ability to define what a habitual truant is. Representative Connolly's comment was, wait a minute, if the whole point of distinguishing who's at fault, the kid or the parent, is trying to be captured in having a definition of a truant versus a willful absenteeism, then we don't need the districts to define habitual truant, because that's really in essence, all we're trying to get after is who's at fault, or whose will is it that the kid's not at school? So that's why we reintroduced, this was not in there, this last version. The last meeting we had this conversation about putting this paragraph back in just for that very purpose of deleting habitual truant on page 4, line 6. That's literally the last meeting so it's not that even a distant memory. That happened at our last meeting, was we asked and we were instructed to bring that back in for this meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I go to page 5 and Romanet 7, it willful absenteeism as defined in the rules of the local school board pursuant to. It just makes sense that you would do the same treatment for both.
Mr. Chairman, if you have an amendment drafted up, let's look at it and talk about it. If you don't, I mean, I just can't keep doing this. I love you guys to death. I can't keep doing this.
So, Mr. Chairman, I made a motion. And it was seconded, I think.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to support it because honestly, if you look at on page 5, Romanet I and Romanet 7, it uses that language as defined in the rules of the local board of trustees pursuant to. And Romanet I, it doesn't say exactly the same, but it's close to it. So let's just use the parallel construction. So I'll vote yes.
Chairman. A friendly amendment that would be page 4, line 6, reinsert habitual truant and willful absenteeism. So they get to define all 3 terms. I just want it consistent.
Yes, sir. 22 LSO 0103 as amended. Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, again, I have a proxy vote for Representative Brown as aye. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom, excuse me. Thank you. Representative Obermuller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Paxton. Co-Chairman Scott. 14 ayes.
Mr. Well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Matt Wilmarth, Senior LSO School Finance Analyst. This is part of the additional materials I handed out this morning. It's 22 LSO 0250 Working Draft 0.5. The accompanying matrix is also with it. It's a 6-page summary of the bill, and it provides by page and line number each of the model elements by paragraph within the bill. Mr. Chairman, you did a good job of explaining the purpose of what this bill does. Just a little bit more history on this. The attachment A was passed in the 2011 session from the result of the 2010 recalibration. The 2015, 2017, and 2020 recalibrations have not re-established any attachment A's. It has been amended 3 times since then, 2012, 2017, and 2018. But you are correct, every time we amend attachment A, it's only a certain portion of that, and there is no historical summary of what attachment A looks like today. So you can't go to the green books and see what are the components of attachment A. It is pieced together through those separate amendments since 2011. And I would further say it's pieced together through the spreadsheets that are also adopted into law and on file with the Secretary of State, and also the cost of education studies that have been a part of the work that established the attachment A in 2011. So with that, Mr. Chairman, this bill, as you indicated, codifies all of the formulas within the spreadsheets and the reports and within attachment A, and puts that into the codified law through a new section 2113-309.1. The prices you see throughout the bill reflect current law. So it does not carry forward this committee's recommendation on the external cost adjustment. It reflects what will happen in school year 22-23 when the current ECA drops off. So you'll note that the price that is in this bill for the price of professional development, for example, that you have seen in the staff comment is lower than what you saw in the staff comment. The reason for that, as I indicated, is the prices reflect current law. And to that point, if you adopt this bill to be sponsored in the 22 budget session, my recommendation would be to address your ECAs, your external cost adjustments, as you have previously through the budget bill. And I'll get into how we do that in this bill. You would point a footnote within section 205 of the budget bill to this bill rather than the current attachment A. So with that explanation, yep.
Just a minute there. Or if they do it as a separate bill, that would be the one to govern,
Mr. Chairman, correct. Yeah.
which they may do.
Sure.
Okay.
But the ECA would be pointed to this section of law and the definitions within this law to apply an ECA to the components within this law. So, Mr. Chairman, section 1 on page 1, line 8 creates section 309.1 in chapter 13. On page 2, subsection A just really kind of summarizes the intent of this section, is that it codifies the components of each of the components within and the computations of those components within the education resource block grant model. Subsection B has a series of definitions, and these are the definitions I was discussing. We define each of these block grant model components in paragraph 1. And these are the components that you apply ECAs to. So subparagraph A on line 12 are the education materials category. And this consists of books and instructional materials, gifted and talented students, career and technical education equipment and materials, student activities, and professional development, and the central office non-personnel resources. And then finally on line 16 of page 3, the operations and maintenance supplies component. All those components make up the educational materials category. So if you were to apply an ECA to the educational materials component, that's what we're talking about, all those components. The only one that is not included in that is the technology and equipment. That has been specifically excluded or subject to the ECA. That is that's the definition of the educational materials category. On page 3, line 20, the definition of, in subparagraph B is the energy category. This solely consists of the utilities component within this section. On page 4, line 1, subparagraph C is the non-professional labor category. And this includes the following salaries for supervisory aides, central office, classified staff, school secretaries, school clerical staff, maintenance workers, groundskeepers, and custodians under paragraph 34 within this section. And then finally, subparagraph D on line 8 of page 4 is the professional labor category. These are the remaining positions consisting of teachers, principals, assistant principals, superintendents, assistant superintendents, business managers, and school computer technicians. We also define on page 4, paragraph 2, FTE, which is used throughout this section, and then grade band. This is one area where we have modified the bill from last year. Within 2113-101 subsection A, there's a series of definitions, and those include elementary school, middle school, and high school. We've referenced those rather than define elementary grade band, middle school grade band, and high school grade band, and made conforming amendments. In the current attachment A, there's a series of school adjustments. And so we've modified or amended those definitions to fit the grade configurations that are used within the funding model. Page 5, line 1, this creates subsection C. This is really the meat of the model. This page 5 through page, I think it's 47, line 14. These are the remaining formulas of the model. I won't go into detail on these unless members have questions, but this is really the crux of the model. Mr. Chairman, on page 5, line 5, paragraph 1 indicates the model resources full day kindergarten. Paragraph 2 on line 8 is a core teachers. This is then identified class sizes really on lines 12 and 13 for elementary schools, class sizes of 16, and then class sizes of 21 for middle and high schools on lines 15 through 19. On page 5, paragraph 3 on line 21, this is one other adjustment we've made since last interim is we've moved some of these adjustments, as I indicated, school adjustments into this paragraph. There are certain grade configurations such as a K7 or K8 or a K9 school where the model specifically treats the K5 grade band as an elementary school and the remaining grades as a middle school for purposes of resourcing core teachers. We felt it was more transparent and a little bit more easy to follow how that works if we brought that paragraph up to this section. Subparagraph B and C, also on page 6, do the same thing, but for the K-12 grade band or the K-5, 6, 8, and 9, 12 grades are elementary, middle, and high school. And then for a 6-12 or a 7-12 configuration, the 6-8 is treated as a middle school and the remaining are the high school grade bands. Page 7, line 1, paragraph 4, allocates the specialist or the elective teacher positions. Subparagraph A is the elementary school, which are 20% of the core teachers generated in paragraph 2. Middle school and high school are 33% of the core teachers in paragraph 2. On line 17, paragraph 5 are the additional career and technical education teachers generated as a product of the number of students enrolled in those courses in high school. On page 8, paragraph 6, this is the adjustment for small and alternative school core staff. Any school that is identified as an alternative school or a small schools, any school 49 or fewer ADM are resource their staff on the ratio of 1 teacher position for every 7 ADM, with a minimum of 1 teacher in each school. On page 8, line 12, paragraph 7 provides the minimum teacher resources for each elementary, middle, and high school. Greater than 49, there's a minimum of 6 elementary teachers, 8 middle school teachers, and 10 high school teachers. On page 10, line 10, paragraph 8 allocates the small school district adjustment for districts with 243 ADM or fewer. This provides additional teacher resources for those districts that have students in a grade in each of their schools. On the bottom of page 10, line 23, paragraph 9 begins the allocation of the instructional facilitator component. And that really the formulas are on page 11. On the bottom of page 11, line 22, and then going on to page 12 is the allocation of tutor resources. And I kind of discussed those earlier today at the request of Representative Summers. Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I missed one other item, and I apologize. The extended day and summer school are also allocated on the basis of at-risk resources. So if go down the road of identifying or increasing that identification proxy, that would be one other component.
Many do we need to go through this in this level of detail?
Mr. Chairman, if not, I will go to page 47. Sorry, I don't know how much detail you wanted. Mr. Chairman, I think it's important to identify the sections of law that are being amended and why they're being amended. Section 2 pulls in the other statutes that will be amended as conforming changes. Page 48 amends 21.2.202 subsection E. Various items or various statutes are omitted just to eliminate and regulations. When we are writing statutes, we're just stating rules. We're removing all references to attachment A and ensuring that the reference to the education resource block grant model is under 21.13.101 subsection A, paragraph 14. That's the intent of this amendment. On page 50, line 11, pulls in 21.2.204 subsection B. Again, this is a conforming amendment of the deletion or the repeal of attachment A. On page 15, 51, my apologies. The 21.13.101 amends the elementary, high school, middle school definitions to reflect the actual grade bands that are currently utilized in your funding model. On page 52, again, these are just more conforming amendments to current definitions of the education resource block grant model to eliminate references to attachment A. Page 53 amends 21.13.09 subsection M, paragraph 5, again, to eliminate the reference of unnecessary language. On the bottom of page 53, subsection O, and then carried over to page 54, again, elimination of attachment A for the purposes of the ECA. And then subsection U on the bottom of page 4, going on to page 55, eliminates the reference to attachment A that's being repealed. And then there's just staff cleanup of eliminating the term interim as it's referenced to the Joint Appropriations Committee on page 55 and page 56. Section 3 are the repealers on line 11 and 12. The first paragraph that's repealed under 2113-101 subsection A is paragraph 13. This is the year of college training, which is not utilized in that chapter. And so that's just the staff cleanup to eliminate that definition that's not utilized within chapter 13. Paragraph 16 is the repeal of prototypical school model. Paragraph 17 is attachment A. And then subparagraph C under 2113-309M, paragraph 5, that is the reference to the RCA and the salary adjustments. Those have been embedded under subsection C under 2113-309-1. Subsection 4 also repeals the attachment A that was established in 2011, and then the additional amendments that have been made since that time in 2012, 17, and 18. And this would be effective July 1, 2022.
So can we represent to the House and the Senate that this does not make any substantive changes to the funding under the block grant model that we've got?
Mr. Chairman, it makes no changes to the funding model.
Okay. So that's safe. And can we also represent to our colleagues that an ECA that passed, by whatever mechanism we happen to use, will essentially modify this and take precedence over the specific numbers here?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Committee, any further questions? I would say what the purpose in this is to increase the transparency, to increase, frankly, I think to preserve our clear understanding of what the law is. I think it's between spreadsheets and attachment A and whatnot, it's in danger of becoming questionable what it really is. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we could get there. And make it considerably easier to deal with this section of the law. So I think this is an important bill. Any further questions? Nope, I'm going to ask for a motion.
We want public comment.
Okay. Bill's been moved, but we will. What?
I'll wait till after public comment.
Yeah, we're going to have public comments. Representative Harshman, I did not hear what you said.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, if I'll just wait till after public comment.
Okay.
That's okay.
Thank you. That's okay.
Sorry.
Any public comment? Any public comment? Going. Nobody on the internet? No public comment. Representative Harshman, you're on.
Mr. Chairman, question really for LSO staff. And so, as you currently go on our website, Wyoming Legislature's website, you can go to finances, you can pull down the spreadsheet, you can work at all of it, you can look at it and change it and do all those things. Is that still going to be part of that'll still be on the website?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, correct. The limitation of the Excel spreadsheets on the LSO website is that it is a static model, that it has not been updated with any updated data. The Department of Education actually has to file the model with the Secretary of State, and it's maintained and put on their website. And this bill does not change those requirements.
Okay, I guess, Mr. Chairman, and maybe just, we all know why we think we're doing this, but I'm just trying to think of what problem you mentioned in your opening comments, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just kind of rehashing them. We're trying to solve a certain problem, but we risk other problems. Is maybe a fair way to say it. And so anyway, I don't know. That's what I'm sitting here wrestling with in my seat. We've got all these bills, you know, the junior college, you know, Wyoming's tomorrow, truancy bill, all these important bills. And I just wanna, where we're gonna put our energy into.
My judgment is the problem we risk here is that somebody will use this as an excuse to try to modify the current funding model we've got. And I guess my pledge to you is that we will resist that. And if it occurs, I know all kinds of ways to kill a bill. And that's what'll happen to the bill. I do think it'll be very helpful in the future to have this in the statute.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those lines, I was wondering if it'd be appropriate if this bill is moved and then passed, if afterward we were to vote on the committee writing a letter to the governor's office indicating that, you know, if somehow this gets sideways and makes it out of both chambers, that, you know, we're looking for a commitment to keep this clean, and aside from any technical corrections that we might flag or see, that, you know, a veto might be appropriate if this somehow gets co-opted. That's just just a thought I had. I didn't know if that would be writing a letter to the governor that would communicate that.
What I'm going to suggest is that rather than raise it to that level, that either Chairman Paxton or I, or both of us, talk to the governor's staff and say, this is what we're up to here. And we are going to try to avoid any substantive changes and avoid using this as a vehicle for substantive changes.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, you know, we've needed to do this for a long time, but I too worry. And it's not so much that we can't kill the bill, but how much time are we going to waste in the process? I think back to last year, if you start down, you can't stop people from bringing amendments on the floor. That's their right. And we could go down hours and hours and hours of this. And in a time when we've got redistricting and a budget, I totally agree this needs done. I'm just struggling. I think of my job when I get to session of managing time and how much time this could eat. I worry about it, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too agree we need to do it. I'm just not sure I'm going to vote for it.
Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just have a question for LSO, and that is about the bill title. In order to make very clear what we're doing, and that we're codifying the educational resource block grant model, but could we call this school finance transparency, codification of the education resource block grant model, to make it even more clear that this bill is really about incorporating what currently exists?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, we can name the bill whatever the committee's pleasure is. We did talk to Representative Summers a little bit about that. You know, is there a way to constrain the title? And, you know, in Matt and I's discussion, I can't recall if this was late last week or maybe over the weekend, we couldn't come up with a way on lines 1 through 4 to limit it so that no amendments could be brought to the substance of the bill. But certainly if the committee has suggestions, and we can visit with Ian and others in legal to see if they might have some ideas in that vein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I did play with the title a little bit to try and narrow it down a little bit, constrain it further. I think there's a couple of things that can be done, but at the end of the day, I just don't think there's any way to stop the Senate or the House from having a field day with this bill. And I'm not saying that it would necessarily pass. Maybe we can kill it, but it'd be 23 amendments in the House and 20 in the Senate, and we'd spend our entire session having to battle it. So while I to support the concept. I think this is a bill that if it were to stay exactly as it is, you know, I'd vote for on third reading. Great bill. I don't know how to get it to third reading in both chambers without a tremendous amount of work. So I'm worried.
Was done by doing a recodification. And we were able to successfully get the measure word out. This is just a recodification. And do not change it. And that has in the past worked. I think we can get it to work again.
Mr. Chairman?
That's a risk. And if it starts to get out of hand, I think the majority floor leader can get it deep six before we spend too much time on it, I would hope.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I think also there's a character limit, if I'm not mistaken, that I hear about all the time in TRW, that you can't, it has to fit on one line. So there's that limitation too, just as we start brainstorming.
You'd have to change lines 1 through 4.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yeah, we'd only have to worry about lines 1 through 4, although we could try and hide the nature of it in the first line. Trust law.
Okay. Okay, so the question before us is, do we want to introduce this and try to see if we can get it cleanly passed? I would urge us to do it. I think doing it in a general session, which is the alternative, you're likely to get it all tangled up with some state attempts to change the block grant funding model, which might well deep six it. So I think budget session is the time to try. Okay. Okay, the question is, should we sponsor? Senator Ruffins.
I did have a couple of amendments, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, deep in some of the provisions of the act. I want to go to page 32. Now, Mr. Chairman, on page 1, line 1, in the title, codifying insert the word existing, so that it reads codifying the existing formulae of the Wyoming Education Resource Block Grant Model. That will at least imply that we're not amending it, we're codifying the one that we already have. And then on line 3, we could divide these, but I don't think anyone will object. Line 3, rather than amending related provisions, conforming related provisions, which is what it's doing, but it closes the window a little bit on the latitude of the amendment. So my motion is to add existing on line 1 after the, and change on line 3, amending to conforming, to at least help constrain it.
And moved and seconded. LSO, do you see any problems with this off the top of your head?
Mr. Chairman, we have the amendments as noted by Senator Raffis.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
We don't have any issues with the amendments as suggested by Senator Raffis.
Thank you. Everybody understand the amendment? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carried. Back on the bill. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're going down this road, what about on line 1, after that first semicolon, adding providing school finance transparency?
On line 1, after finance semicolon, add a new phrase, providing school finance transparency semicolon. Is that?
Something along those lines. Does that work? Mr. Chairman, may I look over to LSO? Does that work and make sense?
Certainly.
So, Mr. Chairman, so if I saw this and wanted to bring an amendment that said this finance model needs to be provided on every district's website or some kind of an amendment, I'm just wondering if that's opened the door for me to introduce some kind of amendment that I believe would increase transparency. I'm just wondering if we're trying to tighten it or if that opens it up a little too much, and instead of just explaining that the purpose of it is that, but again, I'm just trying to think it through. I don't know the answer to my question. I'm legitimately asking, are we opening a window for me to, or anyone to bring an amendment that said, well, this would provide, my amendment's going to provide more transparency?
Mr. Chairman, say in the House, we often, and I'm not sure if this happens in the Senate, but when we have a debate about whether an amendment, for example, makes sense or is a part of the bill, we always go to these opening lines, where the first lines are those that set out what is happening in general, and it's followed by the next specific one. So you can almost read it as an act relating to school finance, right? I mean, that's as broad as it can be, but then you have to keep on going. If you add this next one, providing school finance transparency, add the next one, through codifying the existing formula of the Wyoming Education Resource Block Grant model, and then you have the next one. So the way that we tend to think about how to read this, and we do it a lot on the House side, is that you follow the first words to the second and you learn more about what this bill is about by going through them. So I honestly think that it makes sense because we're not just doing school finance, which is as broad as can get out. We're next doing transparency, and then how we're doing it is by codifying the existing formula. So that's my logic for including it.
I do think if we get in, somebody tries to bring amendments, it gives us the basis to dispose of them in the Rules Committee as changing the bill too much.
Mr. Chairman. I don't know if, and this is on the motion, was it seconded? I'll second it. I don't know if it was seconded. But for the sake of discussion, we usually don't, an act relating to school finance. I'm curious, we almost never change that. I don't know that I've ever seen it not changed. What if it were an act relating to school finance transparency? That might actually not work. I don't know. I don't know if it's legit though. I think it's friendly, but maybe not legit. Until Tanya's less excited about it.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I'm just trying to think through the bill to see if there's any provisions that fall outside of that. An act relating to school finance transparency.
Mr. Chairman. Well, while we wait for LSO to opine a little bit more, I think providing, so just another thought would be providing for school finance transparency by codifying the existing formulae. It's adding the word by in there and linking it toward the codification, maybe another option.
Mr. Chairman, all of those are fine. I was just thinking that putting into the bill description transparency as an overwhelming reason for this act makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm actually willing to defer to LSO about what works there. It seems like you thought that providing school finance transparency was fine. If we want a through or by, works. Senator Rothfuss has worked with me as well, but you let us know. But to me, that's the sentiment behind my amendment.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, I mean, generally speaking, when we title bills, this reads more like a sentence rather than sort of a set of instructions, but I don't know that there's any prohibition in titling a bill in the manner as we've discussed today. I just haven't seen it in my experience.
Let me suggest that I think the original Conley motion achieves the purpose, and these others probably work just fine. but really don't add much to what our original motion does.
Yeah. And Mr. Chairman, I think I agree. And honestly, even though it was my suggestion, adding the transparency after school finance, I think I'm even a little uncomfortable with changing that first provision. So I
Okay.
think Representative Connolly's first proposal is probably the
So, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, I
Best
want to
choice.
keep with my original motion, which is to add on page 1, line 1, after the first colon, providing school finance transparency.
Okay, that's the motion that's been moved and seconded and is before us. Ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carried. Back on the bill. Anything further in the bill? Further in the bill? Call the roll, please.
On 22 LSO 0250 as amended, Senator Brightman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss.
No.
Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermuller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
10 aye, 4 no.
Okay, that passed. It will be up to us to keep it clean. And- Yeah, okay. That's a good idea. Okay, committee. Anything further? 8:30 tomorrow morning? Okay, thank you all.
Leave our stuff here.